What horrific thing had Israel resorted to in the siege of Samaria, and who did Jehoram blame? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 24 to 33. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 24. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Kings chapter 6, beginning verse 24. And it happened after this that Ben-Hadad king of Syria gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria, and indeed they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cab of dove droppings for 5 shekels of silver. Then as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help my lord, O king." And he said, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I find help for you? From the threshing floor, from the winepress?" Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you?" And she answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, 'Give your son, that we may eat him.' But she has hidden her son." Now it happened, when the king heard the words of the woman, that he tore his clothes. And as he passed by on the wall, the people looked, and there underneath he had sackcloth on his body. Then he said, "God do so to me and more also, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on him today." But Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. And the king sent a man ahead of him, but before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent someone to take away my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door, and hold him fast at the door. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him?" And while he was still talking with them, there was the messenger coming down to him. And then the king said, "Surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" In the last lesson, we had Elisha being saved by God from the Syrian raiders, but because Elisha had mercy shown on these raiders, they left the land and never returned. However, this didn't mean that the army of the Syrians didn't return, just that Syria's intermittent raids stopped. We don't know how much time passes between verse 23 and 24, but needless to say, we should allow for a little bit of time to pass between the mercy shown to the Syrian raiders and Ben-Hadad's attack here. We must be drawing closer to the end of Jehoram's 12-year reign over Israel, though, so we can't add so much time as to surpass that figure, which began all the way back in chapter 1. Whenever Ben-Hadad chose to come, though, he besieged Samaria. The siege lasted so long that the people ran out of food. It was so bad that Israel had to turn to eating the dung of doves and unclean animals, in other words, the donkey. But not only that, the worst part of these animals, the head, were selling for exorbitant prices, meaning that not only were Israelites sinning by eating these unclean animals, they were paying through the nose in order to do so. But that was the whole idea of the siege. For if Ben-Hadad attacked, he probably thought that he might very well be defeated, for Elisha the prophet could be called upon to go to God in order for this to happen. Instead, if he got Jehoram desperate enough, then he would lose what little faith he might have had and would surrender without bloodshed. But as we said, there was little to no food in the city. Not even the king had extra with which he could share. And so it was, when the king was passing by the wall, behold, a woman came to him wanting help. Now Jehoram thought that she was after food, which is why he told her that if the Lord hadn't helped her, what makes her think he could? For he didn't have anything either. So she obviously told him that she didn't come to him begging, but for him to settle a problem she had. Jehoram agreed to hear her plea, to which she told him how desperate she and her neighbors had gotten. They had agreed to eat their sons. The first night they killed her son, boiled him and ate him. But when the next night rolled around, this woman's neighbor had hid her son so that he wouldn't be eaten. This angered Jehoram so much that he tore his clothes. But who was he mad at? He was mad at Elisha, and through him, God. Now why we don't entirely have explained to us, But it isn't a stretch to assume that Jehoram thought that Elisha wasn't doing enough to end the siege, or even worse, maybe even prayed to God to have the siege begin in the first place. If Jehoram would have only looked to his own actions and the actions of the people, he would have found the answer of who was to blame: themselves. Sure, Jehoram got rid of the Baal worship of his parents, but the idols were still worshipped at Dan and Bethel, so Israel was still sinning through idolatry. And God was obviously punishing Jehoram for this, using the Syrians in this case to do so. God had even warned Israel in places like Deuteronomy 28 verses 56 and 57 that their sins would lead to punishment, and that when their sin got so bad that their punishment would be bad enough that they would resort to cannibalism. What happened to this woman was terrible, in that nobody should have eaten anybody. But it wasn't God's fault. It was Israel's. But instead of seeing the light, Jehoram called for Elisha to be beheaded. The Lord, however, had warned Elisha of this, and so when Elisha was in his house with the elders, he foretold to them that the king, the son of the murderous King Ahab, was coming to have him killed. And lo and behold, Elisha was right. The king was coming. However, before doing so, Jehoram gave Elisha one more chance. He proclaimed when he came to Elisha that what was happening must be from the Lord. But unbeknownst to us, Jehoram must have previously been told by Elisha to wait for the Lord. For Jehoram exclaimed that the time for waiting for the Lord was over. How would Elisha respond to this? We'll find that out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 to 8, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.